This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. I am in my hometown, the town of my birth, Orlando, Florida, for this week's episode of the podcast. I imagine you can figure out why I might be here because all of my family lives here in Central Florida. And so as I was thinking about how I wanted this, over years and years of doing this podcast now, we started in 2017, never done a podcast with a brewer in Orlando. So this is my very first one. And I'm excited. We're at Broken Strings Brewery in downtown on Church Street, Orlando. And Charles Frizzell is joining me for the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Charles.
Thanks for having me, Jamie.
I remember Church Street well because Church Street was it was a big thing in Orlando, especially when I was growing up.
Yeah.
There was a punk club for a while, Club Spacefish, just down the road here. Now it's Nightshades Nightclub or something along those lines. And I would go see shows there. It's famous now for a G.G. Allen show that happened there that got the whole place shut down. And there's a Shepard Smith clip of him when he was a local newscaster reporting from outside the Club Spacefish. Ooh. I was not at that show. I was not a G.G. Allen fan. I'm still not a G.G. Allen fan, but I did see some fantastic bands there back in the day. We are right down the road, and of course, since that time, they've built a soccer stadium for the Orlando City soccer team. We're about 1,000 feet away from that right now. Yep. You were one of the first breweries moved down in this area, and it's kind of. We tasted some of your beer earlier this year. You sent in some stouts for our stout issue, and they're living on a Doge pastry stout, scored a 93. That got me thinking, hey, maybe we should come down here and have a conversation about brewing. Walked in the tap room. You've got racks of vinyl for sale on one side and are leaning heavily into the music theme.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I can't wait to talk to you about how you brew interesting craft beers for a crowd that varies from game day to having to come down here as a destination brewery because you have a little bit of both and you kind of span both of those audiences. Before we talk about that, what if you could chill your beer with a more efficient chiller? The answer, G&D Chillers, new micro-channel condensers. G&D's micro-channel condensers are highly efficient in hotter regions, use a fraction of the refrigerant over traditional chillers, which provides less opportunity for leaks and lower global warming potential. G&D Chillers engineers are committed to green technology design, developing a more energy-efficient chiller for the brewing industry. Contact G&D Chillers today at gdchillers.com. Also, support for this episode comes from BSG Craft Brewing, announcing a cool new product offering, T45 lupulin-enriched hop pellets. More efficient than T90s, T45 hop pellets contain a higher concentration of aromatic oils and bittering resins, with a reduced level of polyphenols and plant material. This means a big, delicious hop flavor with fewer pounds per barrel, creating a more cost-efficient and sustainable beer production thanks to reduced wort losses. Supplies are limited. Secure your order today at go.bsgcraft.com/T-45. Charles, talk to me about your background in brewing, as we normally do here on the podcast. I'm curious how you caught the bug and how you decided then to go from a passion for brewing or a passion for beer into operating a brewery. And there's a bit of a family lineage at play here too, isn't there?
There is slightly. My grandfather was a brewer for probably about a little over 30 years in Puerto Rico. He got his degree in brewing in New York in the mid-40s after his time in the military. He was actually stationed here in Orlando. We came to find out at one point.
Really?
At the Air Force Base, which is now our airport. So it's always cool to see those connections come through. But so there was always, I never got to meet him. He passed before I was born.
Yeah.
But there was always that, your grandfather brewed beer. And, living in Florida, I've always worked in the hospitality industry. the food and beverage side of things.
It's a pretty big part of the Florida economy.
It is. So, you know, I've always been around, and I've always been interested in the spirits and learning what's the difference between whiskey and bourbon and all that at a pretty young age. Not that I was drinking at a young age, but, you know, when I was in the industry and needed to learn this stuff to be better at my job, I just, you know, I gravitated to it. It was fun to learn about that stuff and be knowledgeable about it and the history and the nuances of all that stuff. And so I've been grinding and working in the hospitality industry for years, and decided to go back to school to finish my degree that I had started out of high school. About 2/3 full way of getting my bachelor's degree. And we have a really cool program down here, the Rosen College, which is part of UCF, that provides a hospitality management degree, one of the best in the country.
Sure.
And I figured, well, if I'm going to go to school for anything, might as well go for something I'm already very familiar with. And went there, and one of the classes that was offered was a beer course. And you would go to class 2 days out of the week, and the professor would teach you about all the different styles, the history, how beer was made. You would drink 3 or 4 different styles of beer that day, the theme of the day's class, the styles of the day. And then if you wanted to, you could stay after class, and he would teach you how to homebrew in the lab.
Right.
And he was really knowledgeable. He didn't just tell you what to do. He told you.
Who's the professor?
His name's Edward Meesom.
Okay. It's a funny story, but that class out of UCF is now being taught by Jonathan Judy, who has taken over for him. And I knew Jay since elementary school up at Domrick Elementary here. And I've actually sat in and been a guest in his class.
I've heard it's not then. It's a mixed mode course now. So instead of going 2 days a week, you only have to go to one. So the interactive and
sometimes
the
you have to
sit
through a session with me on Zoom. It's not nearly as good as it used to be. But they do still homebrew and teach students on homebrew.
So when he had to have a club formed, I ended up becoming the president. So someone student related was involved, and so the first semester was all about learning from him, and the next semester it was about teaching the new group of students. Went out and bought a homebrew kit, started brewing in my apartment across from campus, and I think the first beer I brewed was I was brewing a Corona clone because my grandfather brewed for a brewery in Puerto Rico that was called Corona. So just caught that bug, started brewing more and more, graduated. Ended up getting a job with Expedia here doing group convention sales type stuff. And after a year or so of being, in the top sales and having the single day sales and commission record, they wanted to close my department down and essentially demote me. So I kind of had my corporate sales deflated. And I was like, I think it's time to start really focusing on that brewery thing. And we didn't have really any breweries. There were maybe 3 in the entire Central Florida area at the time. Orlando Brewing, small little Hourglass at the time. They were on I think a 1-barrel system at that time. And Big River down on Epcot, down behind Epcot.
Right.
And so I was like, the best way for me to learn something is to immerse myself in it. And so I went and applied to Big River, got hired as a server, but I became really good friends with their brewer at the time, Kent Waugh, who had come from Colorado and worked at, I believe he's worked at, I want to say Left Hand, Boulder Beer.
Yeah, cool.
So, he had the knowledge. He had been working there for a few years on their 10-barrel system. And what I was trying to gap was my knowledge of home brewing and how to scale that up. The differences in recipe and the processes. How do you clean a tank? How do you fill a tank? How do you carbonate the beer in a bright tank? All that stuff. And he was, I told him a little about myself. He knew my history, my grandfather, and my interest, and he was gung-ho. Basically took me under his wing. And, on the weekends, I would check gravities and stuff for him, or close a valve on a tank, or drop the temperature if he needed. I did all the tours for him for the guests coming through, because it's Disney. People love that extra kind of attention. So that was my gig for almost a little over maybe 2 years, I think. And at that point, the business plan was finalized. I had met some business partners, and at that point, we were looking for the money side of things, either bank or investment. And I started working, left Yard House, because Kent actually left Yard House as well to open Crooked Can in Winter Garden. And I ended up going to open the Yard House on iDrive.
So you left Big River to open Yard House.
It's a little closer to home. And Big River has such a small staff. Getting a day off for work was very hard. Finding someone to cover your shift. Yard House, we had like 125 servers. And they hired me. I was like the resident beer guy on, that everyone came to me when a table had questions about beer.
Right.
And I met my good friend Bill Downs from Claremont Brewing, or Sun Creek Brewing. He's going to hate me for saying that. the first part, not getting it right. From Sun Creek Brewing, we're still friends. We spent Thanksgiving together, so. But that job gave me the ability to be, if I needed to take a day off, to meet with the city, the planning department, my architects, my engineers, and all that, to be able to do that and have the flexibility while still bringing in an income.
Sure.
And because my other business partners at the time, they had full-time jobs, they couldn't really do that. So
right.
I became the person that was on the ground getting everything done to get the brewery open. So yeah, I guess I'm trying.
And then you conceived of this idea,
we
open Broken Spring.
I found this. We found this location on Craigslist. We tried. We tried having realtors find us places, and they never really found something that was in our budget or what we needed for the brewing side of things or what we envisioned a brewery would look like. And so sometimes we would just drive around randomly through areas we thought had potential to them. Sometimes I would just randomly, go through Craigslist, and we found this. We knew how close it was going to be to the potential site of the soccer stadium, how close it is to the Citrus Camping World Stadium. We used to call it Citrus Bowl. Most of us still do.
Oh, yeah, it's still the Citrus Bowl to me.
Yeah. And, how close we were sandwiched in between those two venues and the potential that could have for business for us. And the access to utilities. The space was old auto shop type thing, so the roll-up doors were here. We had access to the electricity we needed. Everything kind of came together, and the price was kind of within our budget. So we pulled the trigger on that.
And you're right here, literally this close to the soccer stadium, Orlando, and now is an MLS soccer team. And
just a couple more blocks down is the Amway Center, where the Magic play.
Sure.
The local hockey team plays concerts all the time. And we see people from there come and visit. So it's we're right close to the two main highways of Orlando, I-4 and 408. So getting here is really easy.
Sure. I want to talk to you about beer, because then figuring out, you have a location, and this location feels in some ways a little bit like Wynwood, Miami. There's not necessarily, an inbuilt neighborhood that just, people walk by and come to the brewery. It's a place you have to come to. Generally speaking, either for a game day or for a concert at one of the stadiums, or you have to want to come here specifically just to get the beer. And that's interestingly informed the way that you brew and what you choose to brew, because you have to balance these people that just show up on game day, and also how do I get people to the brewery when it's not game day? As we were talking before the podcast, I thought it was really interesting to think about what you brew in those two different and complementary ways. Let's talk about that. But before that, a brewery might have 99 problems, but your fruit supplier shouldn't be one. Old Orchard is already known for their quality concentrates, but they also pride themselves on consistent product and reliable supply. When brewers need assistance, Old Orchard is just an email, phone call, or even a text away. Based in Greater Grand Rapids, Michigan, better known as Beer City, USA, Old Orchard is core to the brewing community. To join their fruit family, learn more at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, are you ready to brew like a pro? Pro Brew has the equipment, systems, and technology to take your brewery production to the next level. Check out www.probrew.com for ProCarb inline carbonation technology, ProFill rotary filling and seaming can fillers, the Alchemator inline alcohol separation system, 7 to 50 barrel brew houses, and more. ProBrew offers the craft beer industry innovative solutions to help you brew like a pro. Go to www.probrew.com for more info. We'll definitely talk a little bit more about your grandfather, because I love this fascinating story that goes back to larger scale commercial brewing in Puerto Rico. And we were looking at some pictures earlier of the old brewery from the 50s. And it's just a wonderful thing to see how things have changed, but also, there's still chalkboards with tanks drawn on them, and they're still tracking the production the same way that brewers are today tracking that production. We'll talk about that a little bit, but I really do want to think about, obviously the beers that you've sent to the magazine for review are definitely flavor forward. They're rather intense. Some are a little bit sweet, even though they're balanced, but there's definitely this kind of bigness to it. In Florida, that is something that the entire state of Florida is known for.
Probably one of the few states that'll drink stouts in the middle of the summer.
It's for sure. Yeah. But this entire state has focused on intense flavor in beer in a way that it doesn't necessarily happen that way, in every other place. But talk to me about as as you started Broken Strings, how you thought about what the beer program was going to be, and then how you decided. Now you realized you needed to develop that as you started operating the brewery and seeing who came in here.
Well, we opened almost 6 years ago, before milkshake IPAs were a thing, before kettle sours were still kind of like just being kind of kicked around and heard about. Pastry stouts, all that stuff was. If you had asked me 6 years ago if I was going to be brewing milkshake IPAs and soda inspired kettle sours, I'd probably say like, no.
Your grandfather would be turning over in his grave.
Not necessarily, but the market didn't really. It wasn't around then, So you just focused on and brewing this, brewing the styles and being creative with the styles everyone knew of. So you did cool things with saisons and, stuff like that. And trying to brew beers that you haven't had a chance to brew before, but you had read about.
Sure. And you're still coming at it with, that core spirit of a home brewer.
So I guess we toe two different lines. So we want to be a very cool, innovative destination like brewery in Orlando that gets people to say, that's, from anywhere in the area, that's the brewery we got to go visit this Saturday. They're releasing this cool new, cherry cola sour or grape nerd sour, and we just did a pumpkin spiced caramel coffee sour. And then we do a lot of cool pastry stouts. We did a Twix inspired one, a cinnamon toast crunch inspired one. So we release a lot of cool stuff like that. That's, what the people are asking for. And we noticed there aren't a lot of breweries that are brewing those all the time. And so we have, we brew those cool, creative, innovative styles to make us that destination type brewery.
Sure.
But then we also, because we are centered next to two, sports stadiums that bring in huge crowds on any given, home game or concert or whatever it may be, that a lot of those people walking through our doors are not necessarily craft beer fans. They may just drink lager all the time or not drink beer at all. So we do have some wines and ciders and like stuff like that prepackaged from other places that, for those people that we can have approachable options and still, make some money that day from those customers. But also getting them in the door, we have a great opportunity to let them try some of our other crazier stuff. So, we still brew Kölsch, we brew a light lager, a Hefeweizen, a traditional like Sierra Nevada inspired pale ale.
Right.
So those people are covered when they walk through the door too. When we have those huge days and we want to try and make as many of the customers that walk through the door
you're trying
happy.
To connect people to beers, and you're trying to connect beer people to beers, and you're trying to connect non-beer people to beers.
And even so, it's nice having those traditional styles as well, because the people that do come in on the weekend to have a couple of the cool sours or something like that, they usually end up having a Kölsch or something as their last beer or whatever before they head out. Something that's
even if they don't know what a Kölsch is, it still has beer flavors that are familiar to them.
Yeah, but when someone asks for a beer flavored beer, that's one of our options.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of these more hyper flavored beers, because I think that's something interesting. And I love that you were mentioning it without the typical brewer apology, because oftentimes when you say, oh, we brew this with this, there's this like sigh and this kind of resignation that we have to brew this because that's what people want, but that's not what I really want to brew.
I brew whatever whatever I can put, whenever I can come into the tap room and people are like, bro, or dude, whatever, Charles, this beer, wow. Yeah. And whether it be a traditional beer or one of our crazy one-off, inspired beers, at the end of the day, that's what makes it worth it. And whatever pays the bills too. At the end of the day, we're still a business. If I don't brew the styles that brew what the customers want or will come here for, then I'm doing myself and my business partners a pretty big disservice.
Sure. And there is something about a flavored beer that connects with people through some sense of nostalgia.
We're just kind of going through maybe a weird, different kind of beer renaissance. Would we have lager if the Germans didn't decide to put beer in caves and that allowed the lager yeast to thrive and be almost singled out? And now we have lagers and all of those, back then I'm sure that was blasphemy and gozas and,
That's true. Even the things that we consider long-standing beer traditions now are once
fairly new.
Or once new things.
I think lager's less than 400 years old.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
But we didn't even know about yeast and, till about 150 years
and I know
ago.
like a lot of the stuff we're talking about, are probably on the sweeter side of things.
Sure.
But that's what we all grew up
But
around,
all of these fermented beverages were also all on the sweet side for much of beer's history, and they got drier and they got more bitter. But I mean, there was
ebb and flow.
You think about it,
We'll
for thousands of years, as people were making beer-based or grain-based fermented beverages, calories were important. You wanted to consume them.
It was the only way to be able to consume liquids, or
was right.
Without,
the alcohol,
getting dysentery.
Sure. But people weren't. I mean, sweet things were great because those. I mean, getting calories, period, was a harder thing to do. Anyway, nonetheless, we can.
No, I don't apologize for brewing any of those.
I think that's great.
It's all fun.
I love both approaches, and I certainly respect and love talking to brewers.
When I brew my Kölsch, I do my version of a decoction mash.
Yeah. You do a small decoction mash on a 3-barrel system back here.
Luckily, I have the system we bought when we bought it, used from a brewery that went out of business, was kind of some bits and pieces of things. It's a stout 3-barrel mash tun. It's a stout 3-barrel boil kettle, but the gentleman was using basically like a big stock pot kettle, and he had his or burner, and he has a 75-gallon. He had a 75-gallon stock pot that he was using for hot liquor. So he'd have to heat all that up for his hot liquor. I have tankless water heaters to make my day much easier and not have to wait on bringing water up when I get here.
But now you can cook a decoction.
But now I have a separate burner to where I can pull some of that mash off, bring it to a boil, bring it back, do that a few times. And I found from when I first started just doing regular mash Kölsch's, standard single infusion, that the Kölsch is much better now. The lager is much better now. And so I like being able to add those kind of, I guess, tools to those options to my repertoire for, things to, make those less forgiving beers better tasting. And
taking on that kind of work, especially when you're brewing
definitely adds
in a lager beer at a tiny, tiny scale. I mean, that's noble. And, you have to wonder, especially when you're doing it in 3-barrel batches, does the consumer notice?
Is it worth it? Are they noticing it? I hope so.
Yeah.
But it's more for me than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because you want to, just because you care about what that quality tastes, what that beer tastes like.
Yeah. Because I don't put on the menu triple decocted mash Kölsch. I could.
Right.
Maybe 5% of us maybe 5% of people walk through the door, maybe even less would get it. So, but I feel it's worth it at the end of the day to do that. I mean, the people that I follow or look for inspiration or will read about, or like Christopher Johnson's. I've been to his brewery. He built his Green Bench in St. Pete. That brewery was built for decoction mash.
Right.
He's shown me the whole thing. And so knowing how good their beers are on that side of, all of his beers are great, but his lagers, pilsners are amazing. They're good.
They are. One of them was the beer of the year this past year for craft beer and brewing.
Correct.
Yeah. Postcard pills.
If it's worth him spending that extra money and the time that it takes for him to brew a lager to do those decoction steps, then he's doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And I wasn't expecting to hear that from you in terms of a framework, because I was expecting to talk about more flavorful beers. And I do want to talk about these.
Of course.
But coming at it from that perspective, understanding how you want to approach things in a right way and produce something with the kind of quality that other people are going to respect, but you're going to respect. That's a nice approach. Let's talk about the cherry cola sour. I'm drinking some of it right now. It's a big seller for you.
Huge.
And I mean, naturally, when any brewer says, hey, I'm going to pour for you my cherry cola sour, it's like, the little hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I'm not sure what to expect about that.
So it kind of started as a joke, as most probably great beers do. We wanted to brew a collab with our friends at Toll Road down the road in Ocoee. And one of the guys that works there, Dwayne, used to work for Coca-Cola. And we have this running joke that I hate the freestyle machines, the basically like copy machine of soda machines. They have like the cartridges that go in for all the syrups.
Where you can add cherry or vanilla.
Yeah, no matter what, it tastes weird.
Yeah.
Fun fact on those, if you order like Coke and you add any fruit flavoring to them, you're not getting the Coke base. You're getting the Coke Zero base. If the machine ever runs out of Coke Zero, all of the flavors for Coke go away.
Interesting.
And I've worked with those machines before. The only way to get the flavors to come back, and I asked the guy that comes out that works on the machine, I was like, are we drinking Coke Zero? Or are we drinking real Coke? So it's, if you add vanilla, orange, cherry,
that's where they put the sugar in, so it tastes sugary again.
So they use the less sugar base, which is really weird to me. So
interesting.
Anyway, huge running joke.
A level
whenever
of hospitality insider that I wasn't.
Yeah. So running joke. I hate the freestyle machines. The Coke just does not taste as good coming out of those. And I'm
sure.
I grew up north in New Jersey, raised by Pepsi, but I am now a Coke person since we've moved down south when I was 11. So that was a running joke, and because he worked for him, like cherry cola is my go-to. Like I love cherry Coke.
Okay.
But I also like making it with regular Coke and adding maraschino cherry juice as opposed to like grenadine, which is pomegranate. Most people don't know that either. Most people think grenadine is just cherry juice or fruit. It's basically high fructose with some food coloring.
Yeah.
But true grenadine is made from pomegranates. But maraschino cherries, the little bright red ones that come in that juice, you pour that in regular Coke, it's great. So I was like, that would probably make a really cool sour. So let's do that. And we released it, and it was a huge hit. We released it in the middle of COVID, but people came and sold us out of it. And we've been brewing it like, I think every other month we try and release it almost, or sometimes we'll wait a little longer to make people beg us a little more for it. And then that led to more soda sours. We've done Code Red Mountain Dew. What's the Sam's version of Mountain Dew? I forget. It's like a berry version. Only Sam's Club carries it. And then we've done, you ever had ocean water at Sonic?
No.
It's basically Sprite with coconut.
Okay.
Like a coconut flavored Sprite. We've done that.
Sounds like a Sonic thing.
Done a Dr. Pepper inspired version of soda sour, and they're usually huge hits for us. People love them. And I think, they give you, most people don't like sours because they just don't like the sour aspect, but this kind of gives you a nice balance of like a sweet and sour candy would.
Yeah. I want to walk back and kind of pull it apart, because clearly you are trying to reverse engineer flavors, and you're trying to rebuild those in beer that are proprietary, that some of these folks are doing through their own ingredient process.
If you're asking me how I get the cola flavor, I'd like to keep that to myself.
You don't have to tell me.
Yeah.
But let's see what else we can dance around there. Before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Mountain Rose Herbs, purveyors of the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Whether you want to add depth to your next golden triple with classic notes of cinnamon, pepper, and clove, or artfully layer exotic, zesty grains of paradise into a perfect ale, adding botanicals to your brewing is an easy way to customize a delicious flavor profile. Mountain Rose Herbs has been providing organic herbs and spices to chefs, herbalists, and dedicated brewers for more than 3 decades. Learn more at mountainroseherbs.com and get 10% off any and all orders with the code CRAFTBEER10. Also, as a brewery owner, you know how important it is to keep your machines running so you don't have to deal with the hassle caused by contamination, recalls, and downtime. Clarion makes food-grade lubricants to protect your equipment from the wear and tear that results in breakdowns that cut into your bottom line. Clarion gives you peace of mind so you can focus on what you do best, pouring out great-tasting beverages. Learn more at www.clarionlubricants.com. So, Charles, let's talk about this. Obviously, and again, you don't have to share anything that's a proprietary secret there. Of course. But I'm curious, as you start thinking about those flavors, what your process looks like in kind of tearing it apart in your head and then thinking about how you rebuild that.
That's a good question. Every beer is different.
Yeah.
I guess it's depending what you're looking to get out of it, how difficult those flavors are. Obviously I want to try and use natural flavors as much as possible.
Yeah.
We do use some extracts here and there, not by themselves, always in conjunction with, like, for example, mango. It's really hard to get like mango flavor if you're just using mango fruit. So it's nice to add a little bit of extract.
What does it taste like just as mango fruit?
It's hard for me to explain.
Sure.
but mango isn't as potent of a fruit as say like a blueberry is, or a strawberry, or a passion fruit, for example. I can smell passion fruit a mile away.
Yeah.
But mango's very more of a subtle fruit. So, sometimes it's nice to layer those flavors so it's not so much one dimensional.
And we as consumers have ideas of some of these fruit flavors that are conditioned by the sweetened artificial,
of course,
kind of peaked, additions of those flavors.
Well, fruits taste different when you remove the sugar.
Right.
It's a night and day difference. The sugar is part of a fruit's flavor and aroma. You take that away, and a strawberry will not smell or taste like a strawberry anymore. So if you were going to make a strawberry beer, you ferment all the strawberry out, all of that sugar from the strawberry is gone. It's not going to taste as strawberry-like as you may want.
Right.
So, and if you want to get some of that strawberry aroma back or flavor, you're going to need to add something, from my personal experience.
Yeah, yeah. How do you typically say, blend that, working between something like an extract and the actual ingredient, whether that's a puree or a whole fruit?
Well, the puree and the whole fruits are always first. They're any additional flavorings that are there to complement or boost up what we're looking for always come at the end. So I know if I need how much I'm thinking I may need, if any at all. So most of those are added after the beer has matured or whatever it's done on those fruits or spices or whatnot. And then once it's gone to the bright tank, then I'll know where I need to be as far as adding those additional flavors.
So it's a chef-like process where you get
very
there
much,
and then you make the game.
Yeah, I take
decision.
notes and I have a general idea of where things are going to be, but I come from that culinary background.
Yeah.
To where I taste things as I go, and I know what I may need to do to get to where I want to be.
Yeah.
And, sometimes I may decide to do something completely different, or, something else may come to mind. Yeah, I try and keep a structure and consistency there, but things are always changing. One batch of beer may come out different from another batch of beer.
Sure.
Knocking over my Christmas tree decorations. So it's, I guess it's
So
like
you're
you said,
trying to-
it's a very chef-like kind of way to approach
yeah.
it. It's not the same every time. If the beer tastes the same every time, we'll do the same thing every time. But
yeah. Are there, let's talk about something like a Mountain Dew beer, again, and that's a weird one because you're trying to create your version of this.
Yes.
That connects to what people expect from that, but that also maybe doesn't quite taste as artificial as some of the kind of synthetic, commercial soda additions. And so you have to echo that flavor, but also build a little more tooth and reality to it. Again, where would you start on something like that?
You're trying to chip away at secrets.
There's definitely. I'm just curious.
Well, I think
you do a really nice job with building these flavors.
I'll try the beverage before I'm making it.
Yeah.
I don't want to say I'm brewing something, or I'm not going to put a label on something and say it tastes like something unless it does.
Yeah.
I'm very particular about that. If I'm going to say it tastes like a cherry cola sour, then when you taste it, you don't go, wow, then I failed.
Yeah.
And there's soda like extracts and syrups out there you can use, and
right.
Or things, Mountain Dew is a lemon lime soda with, I think, I don't know if there's melon involved, but I have always gotten a melon, I've always considered it like a melon citrus soda.
Yeah.
So, and for example, Coca-Cola is my favorite, but I've had other versions of colas, like Caribbean colas.
Right.
Red Bull makes a cola that's really good. And one of the things that I take when I drink that Red Bull cola is you can taste the lemon juice in it. There's a lot of everyday ingredients in those sodas that or those some of those flavors we're looking for. They're just combined the right way. Obviously, I'm not using cocoa leaves from South America for my Coca-Cola.
Sure.
But my cola, it's not a Coca-Cola sour.
It's just a cola sour.
Cola sour.
Right.
And that's a very ambiguous term because cola is, I mean, there's been colas around for a very long time.
Talk to me then about building, and maybe we'll back up from the ingredient thing and talk about the beer itself. Because you're layering flavors onto a quote unquote sour beer. From what I've tasted, the acidity is pretty tightly controlled. It's not excessive. It's not something like, it's not a puckering sour. It's very much a tartness, but a very light tartness even at that. It's not an intense thing. How do you build a kind of base recipe that can support some of this, flavorful approach?
I think the correct the way you use the lactobacillus or the souring bacteria you choose, the strain you're using and how you use those.
Yeah.
I've tried sours from breweries that do not sour; they just add back acids. And then I've seen at a convention there's pre-bottled acid blends that you can add to your beer to make it sour. But those
you do it with winemaker's blend. You can do it with food grade lactic acid.
I find that they're missing something. That there's just not that aroma.
Yeah.
And there's like I've let people try my base sour before, and they're like, "Oh, this kind of tastes like lemonade." It's got a nice citrus quality to it, maybe a hint of Cheerio, bready kind of, aroma. So I don't want to do the sours that way, and I'm still hesitant to try Philly sour. I'm about to read a Milk the Funk podcast. I'm about to listen to, they have one on Philly sour, and I'm worried I may drop the pH. Will it drop it low enough? Will it give me those other flavors and aromas that I'm looking for in that base sour?
Right.
I don't use my lacto more than 3 strains or 3 generations.
Yeah.
Though I use Omega Blend from Omega Lacto Blend.
Yeah.
I found it's the most consistent and the best one I've used. But I can't. It seems like anything after.
And that's a blend of what, a Plantarum and Brevis, I think.
I believe so.
Yeah.
So the way from what I understand from speaking to them, they chose the blend because one works better at the higher temperature, and then as it drops as it's sitting, the other one kind of takes over, and they both add their own kind of dimension to the sour.
Right. Also different hop tolerances for those 2 strains.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, I don't add any hops for IBUs. It gets a pre-acidification down to about 4.5, which helps with letting anything else kind of get acted before the lactose. It gives the lacto kind of a head start.
Yeah.
Anyone I've spoken to. And this all goes back, I guess I'm going to call out Christopher Johnson again, and I believe it was another brewer from, I think, Creature Conference. It was, I believe, the first Florida Brewers Guild conference, and one of the sessions was on kettle souring, and I hadn't done a sour at that point. I think maybe it was our second year open, sours were still new. It was just stuff you would read about and hear about, and a couple people were doing them, but, and they kind of, they laid everything out, like, the temperatures, the pre-acidification and stuff like that. So between learning from them and the research I did online and in books, I think we've come up with a pretty good sour base that does really well for us.
Is there anything to the recipe?
I mean, it's fairly simple. It's mostly Pilsner malt with some oats and some white wheat.
Oats?
Yeah.
Not just wheat?
Not just wheat, yeah.
Yeah.
Some white wheat and some flaked oats, rolled oats.
How much, generally speaking, roughly, how much oats, how much wheat in that overall mix?
I think that's less than 20%.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Just enough to give help with, I think it helps with mouthfeel, helps with head retention. We haven't had an issue with getting, when we have a good carbonation on the sours and a pour, for them creating a head.
Yeah.
It doesn't always last forever depending on the adjunct type ingredients we've added to the process. But
right.
for the most part, I just didn't want to do like a 100% Pilsner, and everything I read, adding a little bit of oats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Kind of help.
some softening and support, and
Correct.
adds a little, kind of mid-level to that too. So it's not just high-level sweet. Kind of helps support some of that, especially as you're throwing flavors into it.
It ferments out really well. I mainly only use 05.
Yeah.
US 05, 1056, American Ale Yeast.
Yeah.
So many names. But Chico.
Yeah. So it's a very clean fermentation there after the
and because we're small and getting liquid yeast pitches to us sometimes is cost prohibitive.
Yeah.
I'm trying to talk Omega or someone into opening up a yeast lab in Florida.
Sure.
So we don't have to pay so much in overnight shipping.
Are you, when you are going through that lactobacillus, acidification phase, are you doing it in the kettle then? And then
my kettle's set up great for it. It has a lid that latches onto it.
Yeah.
We run a hose out to a blow-off tube, a fairly long hose, because it does tend. The first kettle sour I did, I put the kettle under some pressure, but not enough, and it buckled the lid a little bit from sucking in.
Yeah.
So thankfully I didn't crush the whole thing like a can. And one of my local buddies, Travis, he was here one day and he's like, "Well, your site class, you have a tri-clamp ferrule type hole on the very top of your kettle. Put a hose out of that and use that as like if it does start, it'll suck up some water, not itself." And usually after pitching, I'll come in the next day and there'll be water that's risen up about 2/3 of the hose, just enough to keep the tank from shrinking in on itself.
Yeah,
but not enough that it's soaking up all that water and contaminating or whatever you want to may happen. And what I'll usually do, I'll just come in and I'll rouse it again from the bottom with more CO2, push it back out, give it, give it a nice mix, and that usually does the trick.
Yeah. So then you boil after that. Were you letting it go 24 hours or?
Usually at about 36 to 48.
Okay.
Yeah. I haven't figured out. I don't know if I'm doing something, but after 24.
You're in a 3-barrel system and you have time to let it sit for 48 hours.
Yeah.
God bless you.
Yeah. I usually plan for them to be at the time where
that's your Friday brew.
All the fermenters are full already, so I'm not needing.
Gotcha.
It can take a day or two to sit in there.
Makes sense.
I've thought about converting one of my fermenters to just a souring vessel.
Yeah.
But not quite there. I'd rather. I'm looking at more getting a 10-barrel system, keeping 3 of the fermenters for 3-barrel behind in a bright tank, along with 10-barrel fermenters, and being able to brew off a 10-barrel batch of a sour or a 10-barrel batch of a stout, fill it into 3 different fermenters, and being able to treat each one of those a different way.
Sure.
And then, but still have the capability of brewing 10-barrel batches of stuff that's just going to be one thing on its own into a 10-barrel fermenter.
Yeah. What, in terms of building crazy soda flavors, what's the most interesting ingredient that you found yourself to? And again, I don't need all your secrets. I'm just curious about one of the most interesting things you found that just made one of those.
So we did the cherry.
Just put it over the top.
We did the cherry cola once, and one of my regulars was like, "You should put chocolate in that."
Yeah.
Which I thought was like, "Are you crazy? Like, there's already so much going on."
Yeah.
So I humored him, and we aged a 6-stole with some cocoa nibs, and it sold out in like a day. Everyone loved it. So it's just kind of,
right.
that I didn't think to do. So every now and then it is okay when someone when one of your customers or regulars says, "You know what you should do." I guess every now and then it's okay to listen. Take the advice.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of anything else crazy.
Are there places that you go to that you find produce better quality extract flavoring, or some things that kind of hit notes better than others?
I bounce around. I have a local provider here of fruit purees that provides a product out of France that is really good. Some people hate them, but I use Amaretti for some stuff.
Yeah.
I always look for the discount code first. So it's always
sure.
Usually make sure I save about 15% off my order, or I won't order. I'll wait a day or two.
Yeah.
And sometimes I find some stuff on Amazon. depending on how fast I need it, you know, because the Loran and the very, all kinds of, you know, sometimes they can get your stuff a lot quicker.
Sure.
Sometimes cheaper. And like I said, sometimes I the Caribbean or the Oriental grocery stores, I'll get stuff. Although not necessarily extracts or stuff like that, but, you know, just cool, unique fruits or ingredients like teas or something like that.
Is there a beer where you've taken something like that, an ingredient that you found at one of those local grocery stores, and you found that, you know, you don't even need to talk about it being there, but it's trying to think.
I'm trying to think of something we've done from those grocery stores. But one thing I've done, my wife used to buy the cotton candy grapes when they would come out on sale.
Sure.
You can only get them once or twice a year.
Yeah.
You used to only be able to find them at the grocery stores. So I would only be able to get enough to do like a 10-gallon a pilot batch.
Yeah.
But then as they increase their vine acreage, I could start finding it at Costco to where I could buy 130 pounds worth, which is always a fun trip to Costco.
Yeah, sure.
Everyone is looking at you and wondering why you have like 8 of these big boxes of grapes. And usually I'm going to make a beer with it, which even confuses them more.
Yeah.
But that's been a really popular beer for us because it's a unique ingredient in and of itself. It stands alone on its own. The fruit itself, I don't have to add it. I don't add a cotton candy extract or a grape extract. It does not need it.
Really?
It's a really cool fruit that on its own.
You take your normal.
We take our sour and we clean the grapes. So my wife usually comes and helps. That's her
Washing and destemming.
Yeah, we wash and destem them, and then we freeze dry or we vacuum seal them. Put them in a chest freezer as the beer's doing its thing. Because usually I'll get the grapes first. Someone will call, one of my regulars will send me a Facebook message of
they're here.
They're at Costco.
They're at Costco.
Yeah, I have like an
right.
I get these messages all the time. I have an army of people out here looking for ingredients when they see them.
Yeah.
And so when the cotton candy grapes become available, the 2 times a year that they show up at stores, since they go fast, if I'm not busy, I will get in my van and go and pick up the grapes that day. And then, you know, we process them, and then I'll go ahead and brew the beer while they're freezing, which does couple things. It helps kill some of the bacteria that may present itself.
Right. And
and it opens up the crystals, kind of, you know,
breaks
puncture,
down the cell walls.
Breaks down the cell walls, exactly. And so about a day or 2 before I'm ready to add the grapes, I will pull them out of the chest freezer, put them in the walk-in, let them thaw, and then I got one of those wand blender RoboCoupe type things, and I'll puree it all up as best I can, and dump it in the tank and let it finish off. And always, it's a very popular beer for us, and I don't think many other breweries are using that ingredient for beer. So it's kind of something that I like to do that's unique.
Do you even strain? How do you make
I
sure
run it through like a stainless steel strainer thing that pretty much most of it will all settle down, and the racking arm will allow me to pull it from above. But I do run it through a filter.
You crash those to help drop stuff out?
Oh, yeah. But I mean, it gets crashed before it goes into the bright tank.
Right.
But most of, you know, the skins and all that tend to settle, the meat of the grape. You know, a couple seeds may still be floating around up in the top of the beer. So I do run it through like a mesh type stainless steel cartridge filter that we have that I got from GW Kent or something along those lines.
Right. Now, for something like that, you mentioned that you're not hopping for bitterness, but there's got to be some hops.
We don't hop for bitterness before the acidification, but I do usually have an IBU, I think, of 20 to 40 on the sours, depending on. I think I shoot for 20.
So post lacto, you're
because we do the initial like 10 to 15 minute boil. We do the original boil after the mash to sanitize the wort, bring it down the temperature, pre-acidify it, add the lactobacillus, seal it off, purge with CO2. Let it sit for 36 to 48 hours. Boil it off again for about an hour. So it
full on hour after
it gets about a 90-minute boil in total.
Okay.
Just separated between like an hour and a 30.
Sure.
And it's that boil, the second boil, that it gets hops. And I usually use the Flex hop bittering. It's like an oil.
Yeah.
because it's very clean. It's it's consistent throughout the whole. So I'm pretty confident I'm getting the IBUs where I want them to be,
right.
and I get a better yield. I'm not having to use, and I don't need to use a lot of hops anyway for a 20 IBU sour, but I like using the flex on that product.
When you're brewing with 3-barrel system, you want to get
every little bit counts.
Every little bit out of that for sure.
Yeah.
And in that sense, like these are beers that are going to be flavored in different kinds of ways, and so the exact hop, like having it.
The hops aren't the show,
right?
No,
it's
the hops are the bitterness is there just to provide balance.
Yeah. How much does that vary depending on what your flavor goal is for that specific batch?
I mean, I pretty much try and stick with 20.
Yeah.
I think maybe the cotton candy I do 40, and probably when I'm working on start doing some imperial sours, I want to barrel age one of them, do like a whiskey sour.
Yeah.
So that'll probably be like more like an 8 to 10%. So that'll probably get a little higher of an IBU.
Yeah.
To balance out the bigness of the beer.
Sure.
But I pretty much stick with 20 on most of all the kettle sours.
Cool. Let's talk about stouts for a little bit, because obviously that's what knocked it out of the park with our judges. And I'm drinking a little bit of one right now with some vanilla in it and
cocoa nibs. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's hibernating Mariah. It's a play on Mariah Carey. How she comes back to say hello to us every time this time of year.
It's true. It is this time of year.
I'll admit it. It's probably one of my most favorite Christmas songs.
I connect that song with
my bartender hates it.
I connect it with Love Actually, which is one of the worst movies that's ever been made in the history of cinema.
I don't think I've ever actually seen that movie.
You're lucky.
Yeah.
And
I try to stay away from rom-coms.
My wife will watch it every year, and we make sure that I am in a different room watching something else at the same time. A
funny thing, I'm a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan, and I've never seen The Notebook. But I'm told it's about the Eagles are part, like he's an Eagles fan. But I'm not interested in watching The Notebook.
Well, let's talk about this. Obviously using big flavor, but also in a real way as a part of your approach to brewing stouts. And here we are in Florida where people will actually drink these sweeter flavored stouts year round.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how you go about constructing, flavor ideas, but then also getting quality flavor that hits what you expect out of those.
The flavor ideas usually present themselves. I mean, it's usually watching TV or being out to eat somewhere or eating something myself, like Twix, for example.
Right.
We've done a Twix-inspired stout. We called it Caramel Shortbread Chocolate Cookie because we didn't want to call it Twix. For obvious reasons, we skirt the line on that some, but we try and make it to where I don't get in trouble.
Was it based on left Twix or right Twix?
Well, that's the funny thing. We made 2 different labels, and one of the labels is left and the other says right on it. And they're colored a little different. They're shaded a little differently. So we played around with that, but we didn't call it out specifically. Like it doesn't say Twix on the label. We just refer to the ingredients that are used to make up the Twix cookie bar.
You can steal other people's IP up to a point, but then you want to avoid the legal ramifications of that. Yeah.
But people get it. When they taste it, they know what they're tasting.
Right.
They know what it is they're eating. Cinnamon Toast Crunch. For this hibernating Mariah, we didn't want to get anything too crazy. We brewed it with Descent. It was a collab with Descent Brewing out of St. Pete, and they have a second location in Lakeland. To where they came back here. They came here and we brewed a batch, and I aged it in a Blanton's barrel. And then I went to their place and we brewed a batch, and they aged it in a rum barrel. And we treated it with cocoa nibs from a chocolate supplier in St. Pete. That's their neighbor. We used vanilla beans from the same source. And so it was kind of like basically a way to see like how different the beer would react with bourbon as opposed to rum, and kind of see how even though we brewed it the same way, essentially how just being different brewers, how it would come out.
Talk to me about the fine points of adding these things.
So what I found,
because vanilla is an expensive ingredient, you want to get the most out of it, but you also want it to feel right,
of course,
not taste medicinal, which can also go to.
Yeah.
There's big earthy components to vanilla.
Vanilla beans, they aren't as bad in price as they were at one time. I know that there was like the tsunami came through and like devastated a crop, and from what I understand, they've rebounded quite well.
Sure. And the price of it in general has led to more farming in other kinds of places.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I find there really is no good substitute other than just really good fresh vanilla beans.
Yeah.
I mean, the flavor and the aroma you get off of them, extracts help, but they don't mimic that.
Right.
Luckily when the beer is sitting in a barrel, it's got time. I think this one spent a little over a year and maybe a month in a barrel, 13 months. So it had plenty of time to put like 50 vanilla beans in there.
Did they go in at the start and they just sat in there?
They didn't go in right away. I was waiting for some to put in an order and get. So they didn't spend the full 13 months. I think they probably spent more like 8 months.
Still 8 months.
Maybe a little less.
8 months of vanilla beans is a long time.
And then the cocoa nibs I added.
Was there anything to the way that you process that vanilla? Do you chop it up? Do you sanitize it?
The way I personally do it,
build your own
I do
tincture
chop
extract?
it up previously, like open up the bean,
Right.
split it down the middle.
Right.
I'll usually chop it into maybe thirds, and I will put it in a like mason jar and give it a day or two with some bourbon on it.
Right.
Just enough so everything's covered, because it'll be jam packed with beans, and
Yeah,
just enough bourbon in there so it can sit overnight with some alcohol and give it one last kind of opportunity. And sometimes I'll use vodka depending on what I have on hand or what I'm looking for in the finished beer. But if it was going in a Blanton's barrel, it's soaked in Blanton's before it went. The beans did.
Yeah.
They soaked in Blanton's. It's nice to be able to have Blanton's to do that with. But,
for sure.
I have some connections, so it's nice to
You guys are
have those.
bougie like that. Okay.
Yeah. I like good bourbon.
Hey, don't we all?
Yeah. What I have found with the bigger stouts like this, the pastry stouts, if you will, I mean, we're starting off with very high gravity, usually around 32 bricks-ish, give or take. And I'm using a yeast strain that is not going to attenuate the majority of that. It's going to leave me a beer with a finished beer to 1050, 1055 final gravity.
Really?
So, I mean, that's the sweetness.
Yeah. This one is not USO5 then?
No.
Okay.
I do not use USO5 on the big stouts.
What do you use on the big stouts?
On the pastry stouts, if you will.
Okay.
I use Conan.
Oh.
Conan usually
Yeah.
the most. It usually at about 12% goes to sleep. It's done its job.
Yeah.
Leaves me a nice final gravity to where I have a nice thick boy, if you will.
Sure.
Which is what people
That's what the
are
people
looking
want.
for.
Right.
And I think we're doing a pretty good job of it. We've won a couple medals locally. We got a really good review from you guys. I think in Orlando, I think a lot of people think of us as, I think we've kind of, our niche is our stout and sours, I would have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's basically what we mostly release on weekly basis. Is if it's not a kettle sour,
That's the thing that'll get people to this tap room when it's not a game day.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
And it works.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah.
But what I have found, back to your question about adding the flavors, these big stouts, you need to use a lot more than you would a smaller stout to overcome how big the beer is to start with.
Yeah.
Because
your alcohol and your roast and your bitterness are all there already. And they're already
if it's
there at an
barrel aged
intense
or not
level.
barrel aged, any of these big high gravities that you started with, maybe big sweetness to overcome, I'll put in what I think is enough, and most of the time I have to go back and add more, or more cocoa nibs, or more vanilla, maybe vanilla extract if I have to, because it takes, or coconut, whatever ingredient we're doing for that.
Sure.
We do a German chocolate cake version that gets coconut, and the amount of coconut I would add to like I've done a coconut brown before, or like a 7% stout. The amount of cocoa nibs I would add to a 7% stout as opposed to the pastry stout, I think it's maybe like 3 times as much.
Wow.
You just have to throw that much more at these big beers to get the flavor profile.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily just scale in a linear way. You definitely are moving in an exponential kind of fashion. The bigger that it gets,
you just have so much to overcome, as opposed with like the 6% sours. They're very clean bases to begin with. They're a little citrus, little, like you said, like almost like a lemonade quality to them, very citrusy. But it's very easy to get flavors into those,
right?
because you're not dealing with a big beer to begin with.
Such an interesting concept thing. We were thinking about talking to the Braro Pinta folks, about brewing a Grodziska, smoked wheat beer. And it's like, it's 100% smoked wheat malt. Like, that sounds like a crazy beer. But yeah, if it's 2.5%, it's so little malt, period, versus the amount of liquid that's in, that it just doesn't come across. Like, it's these small pieces there. But it goes the exact other direction when you start getting into 12+% beers, where there's just so much, that's in there that you have to overcome.
For sure.
Interesting. What's your favorite special ingredient in a stout? What's the most interesting special ingredient that you found, or was maybe surprising, or caught you off guard, or worked in a way that was different than you might have expected it to?
That's a good question. I mean, it's not that weird of an ingredient, but the one or two that I've put marshmallows in, the marshmallow just really gives it a nice. And I know marshmallow is essentially just vanilla.
Yeah.
But there's something else, marshmallow, hard to explain, that's there that kind of almost softens the beer.
Yeah.
Like, you can taste the pillowiness of the marshmallow almost.
Sure. How do you add marshmallow?
Real marshmallows, but we don't put them in as fluff. I almost melt them down into
a liquid.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Not almost to like a lot. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
You could go buy fluff, but you're buying like 80% air.
Right.
And then a little bit of a flavor extract to kind of help with the aroma.
Yeah. I was talking about this with Marcus Baskerville of Weathered Souls last year.
Okay.
Maybe it was earlier this year. And his suggestion for marshmallow powder.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. Marshmallow powder.
Try that up. I've heard of cream cheese powder as an option. I've been thinking about doing that. And then I hear people are using soft serve. Like, they'll go get the powder that you mix with milk or whatever to make soft serve ice cream, and they're using that to put into beer. So, yeah.
It's a brave new world.
I'm sure there's probably something more unique than marshmallows I've put in a stout. I guess I'm having a brain fart right
It's a very different world from when your grandfather was brewing in the Puerto Rican Corona brand.
The most fun one I did was Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Yeah.
That one tasted so good. So good.
What an interesting, how far we've come from 1950 to now, and I think these trends are all cyclical.
I'm sure if there were craft breweries back then, someone would have made like an Ovaltine stout.
I could see that,
because that was the thing back then. Carnation instant breakfast.
You're talking about the Madman era. Like, if they could find a way to sell any of this like dream of the future, they would have absolutely. Yeah. Like, if there was any way to
if
do
craft breweries existed back then, I'm sure there would have been some crazy stuff back then. It just their amount of stuff.
It was just all controlled by a small handful.
Yeah, they didn't have Sour Patch Kids back then, like we do now. And have the ability to go on their website and order 40 to 50 pounds at a time of one flavor.
Also,
it's almost like they want us to do it.
Right. There was also this kind of, puritanist kind of, or puritanical American, we can't mix alcohol with these kinds of things going on in culture. And thankfully we're not in that place anymore.
I think, when wine coolers and Zima and all that happened, the gates are open.
There you go. Anything, we can do it all now. So, Charles, in the big picture, what's the goal for Broken Strings, and where do you see this going over the next couple of years?
Well, we'd like to get a bigger brew system, and I have been kicking around the idea of opening a secondary tap room somewhere in the area.
Right.
Maybe somewhere closer to where the tourists are.
Right.
And just having, secondary space to reach people that we're not able to get right now.
A lot of people come to Orlando. They don't have a car. They take transportation to the theme parks, and so getting around, getting up to downtown Orlando is a little harder to do.
I can add more production here.
Yeah.
I can't really do much about my tap room space.
Right.
So the only way to really be able to do that is to look at adding tap room space somewhere else.
Sure. What does success look like for you? And when will you know you've achieved it?
I mean, without being too cheeky, I kind of say I don't work for anybody anymore. I'm my own boss, and that's probably the greatest kind of freedom from all of this. Is I wake up every day, and when I come to work, it's the fruits of my labor are directly benefiting myself and not a nameless or a faceless entity that at the end of the day might not care about me. So I'm happy. I'm probably, I wake up every day and I get to come to my own brewery and do my own thing. And
no one's forcing you to brew pastry sours but yourself.
No.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me on the podcast. G&D's micro-channel condensers are highly efficient in hotter regions. T45 hop pellets contain a higher concentration of aromatic oils and bittering resins with a reduced level of polyphenols and plant material. Old Orchard pride themselves on consistent product and reliable supply. ProBrew has the equipment, systems, and technology to take your brewery production to the next level. Get 10% off your next order from Mountain Rose Herbs with code CRAFTBEER10. Charles, remember that discount code at Mountain Rose Herbs.
I'm all about discount codes.
CraftBeer10, and make your system 100% food safe with Clarion lubricants. Of course, if you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button. We bring you this great brewing content from some of the world's most inspiring brewers, and our all-access subscriptions bundle the magazines with exclusive digital content and video classes you can't find anywhere else. Up right now, we just posted one from JC Hill at Alvarado Street on brewing hoppy beers with enzymes. It's not to be missed. And there's also some great courses out there that we've put up recently with Vinny Chilurzo and Taylor from Russian River. Some really cool stuff out there. Check it all out. Go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. Charles, if people want to learn more about Broken Strings and the creative, flavor-forward beers that you brew here, where do they find you all?
Facebook, Instagram, brokenstringsbrewery.com. Probably the best places. Untapped, if you're on there, you can. Every time a beer's updated, we have our menu updated on there.
Help Charles get to that 3.9 aggregate rating for the brewery. You're right there. It's right there between 3.89 and...
We go back and forth on it. I keep hitting 3.9, and then, we started when we first opened. I think we were at 3.79, 3.8, and then,
You've just been working
I don't put much into it, but it's something I pay attention to. Almost every day I'll log into Untapped and Toast almost every check-in.
Wow.
Just to keep an eye
and
on
it's
things.
you doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it hurts when you get when you see the 1-star review.
Sure.
I didn't like this IPA or this sour, and
it's too hoppy.
Yeah. It's a great amount of self-control being able to stop yourselves from commenting on stuff like that.
Doing it in the morning is a smart thing, rather than doing it in the evening once you've had a beer.
I go through and I check the Untapped check-ins and just to see how beers. And sometimes you'll find you get a temperature of what people are thinking of certain beers,
right.
And maybe you didn't do something right, and that you'll find out about it there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, like I said, pop on there. See if we can get this to 3.9. Yeah. Thanks for joining me on the podcast, Charles. Cheers.
Thank you for having us.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.